So, why don't men read? I guess I didn't realize that this was a conversation being had, but I guess it kind of is. I was reading Substack this morning, and I read an article about why men don't read, and then I read a couple more because it was just something that I was interested after reading this first one. And it was really interesting because a lot of people had a similar take on why men don't read, and it wasn't something that I really agreed with. The common take that I saw was men don't read because it is considered a feminine activity and they don't want to be associated with it. There are a lot of reasons. People were talking about the hyper-competitive nature of corporate America. They were talking about, financial mindsets and grind mentality, and I guess I don't know. I didn't really agree with a lot of the takes being said on a lot of the articles that I read this morning when I was reading Substack. And, I was thinking about it when I was going into work, and I talked with my buddies about it, and I've only reaffirmed that I don't really agree with that take. I think that you'd have to be pretty insecure as a man in your manhood to not engage in reading because you think it's a feminine hobby. I think that's I don't know any guys like that. Maybe they exist, I don't know. And for those of you who don't know, I work exclusively with men. I was raised by a single father. I only have sons. My life is pretty much dominated by men, except for my poor wife who has to put up with all of us. And I just think that when I was talking with my buddies, I don't really have any research on this. So me talking to you guys, me telling you this is the product of literally just a day of talking with my buddies. There's no research going into this. But from what I gather, at least with me and my friends, I think that the real reason that guys don't read is mostly because they just enjoy receiving their narratives through different mediums, and I think that video games is a really palpable one. For example, I think that guys really like to receive their narratives through video games, which, we can have different conversations about, video game narratives being more oriented towards a male audience, which is absolutely true, and more contemporary female or literature being oriented towards a female audience. I think that both of these things are true. I don't necessarily think that it's a bad thing, but I think there's just a reason that it snowballed into this. And it's because each gender is more geared towards receiving a narrative through these mediums. That's not an absolute statement by any means. I know plenty of chicks that like to play video games, and I know tons of guys that like to read. But, at least for me, I love video games. Some of the best stories that I have ever received are through video games. I can still attribute my 10-year career in Army Special Operations to the moment I downloaded Gears of War 2 way back when I was a kid. That set me on a trajectory that snowballed its way into my career, my lifestyle, what I am today, just because I loved that game so much. I remember being in basic training before RAS, before Ranger School, before anything, and our drill sergeants, some of you guys are here because you played too many video games and X, Y, and Z. And I was like, yep, that's me. That's how I ended up here. And that shit looked cool, and now I'm here. Which, I think that's fine, I think that's the effect that deep stories are supposed to have on us. They're supposed to inspire us and maybe make us make some rash decisions. But, I think that it's interesting to say that the men don't read because they think that it's a feminine activity. I think that the reason that men don't read is just because they like to absorb their stories through different mediums. And, I think that there is merit behind the statement that literature is primarily oriented towards a female audience now, especially fiction literature, like fantasy. Romantasy is a big thing now. I get it. And a lot of people will cite to that. But, if you didn't read a single book written before 2020, you still couldn't read all of the stories written for men over the past, let's even just say 200 years. You have a decade of work before you hit a wall of not having anything to read, which is one of the joys of literature. It's such an old medium of telling stories, the oldest medium of telling stories other than art, that, you have so much available to you. And I think that, yeah, it's interesting because I've seen my buddies read, we go on a 4-month deployment, we have nothing better to do. I've seen them pick up a book, crush it in 2 days just to pick up another one. We very deliberately bring books that we don't all bring the same books so that we can book swap. That's a pretty big thing that I started back when I was a corporal. And it's super, super fun. You kind of start an impromptu book club, and it's really great. I've seen plenty of guys read. But I don't know. I thought that it was interesting hearing a take that it's like feminine. And I saw another article that was kind of talking about like literature is like being ruined or something. I don't know what the point that they were trying to make. And I know that there's been a lot more fantasy specifically oriented towards a female audience. We're seeing a lot more female protagonists, and we're seeing a lot more onus placed on relationships. And again, I don't really think that that's a problem in my mind. Like, you can talk about oversaturation of a market, but I guess that's fine. Like, the existence of female literature doesn't mean that guys aren't publishing books and stories for men aren't being published. You literally just type into Google books written for men to past 2020, and you will find a plethora of really good ones. And I don't know. I think that it's just a weird take. That's just kind of what was on my mind today, and that's what I talked with all my buddies about while we were at work. So yeah, I think that at least in my mind, that's it. That's the primary reason that guys don't read. Is that for the most part they just tend to enjoy receiving their narrative through a different medium. And again, I think that we as a collective don't read enough. I don't think that's a male to female thing necessarily. Maybe men are worse about it than men. I think that we should definitely endeavor to read more. But yes, because it's important to receive narratives and to receive stories, to learn about heroes, and to just let your brain wander, to be happy and to imagine. I think that level of immersion is really, really good, and preserving our imagination is very important, especially in the face of AI. Not going to talk about that. But I also believe that the psychological effect that reading has on your mind is so consequential and so important for your development, and it's something that has really passed us by. And I don't really have a chart of facts and figures in front of me. I'm not going to speak too much on that. I've done a lot of research about it, and it's really not something that I'm qualified to talk about, at least on a higher level. But it's also not something that I really need to defend. Anyone with half a brain cell understands that reading is good for you. And I have a lot of opinions about, only absorbing books through Audible and through like that, I guess, avenue of books. I think that it's better to read. I'm not saying that audiobooks are bad necessarily, but I think the physical act of reading with intentionality is so, so, so important for our development, and it's great for your imagination. Regardless of if you want to be an author, I think that it's most authors do read pretty often, at least I do. But even if that's not something, if you're not a creative person at all, I think that the physical act of reading is so, so important, because it's a muscle. It's a muscle. Your imagination's a muscle. Put it on a freaking t-shirt. And again, I don't think that I need to, I think that I'm kind of fighting a downhill battle on that one. I think that most people would agree with me on that. But that's just kind of the thing, is I'm not trying to win anybody over with this argument. We all know that it's true. It's just through apathy that we choose not to engage with books and not to read, because we're just more, I like to give humanity the benefit of the doubt. I don't think that people are malicious. I just think that people are incredibly lazy. And when I say people, I mean me, myself. I am incredibly lazy, just like all of you are. We have a tendency to slip into apathy if we're not careful. It will happen. Where just over the course of a couple weeks, I'll get a little too comfortable with scrolling on my phone, and I'll have to make a quick adjustment. And I just think that's kind of festered its way into all aspects of her life. That went on to a little bit of a Luddite rant, which, will tend to happen when I don't catch myself. But yeah, I don't know. That's what I was thinking today. Maybe you guys will get a couple more of these rants where I come into these arguments with absolutely no clinical research, and I just talk to you about anecdotal evidence, which I think is really important. I think that people see a lot of charts, facts, and figures and have a tendency to cast aside their own lived experience, which I think is just as important. If you see something, if you're reading something on your screen, and that doesn't really make sense with what you've seen in life, take a second. Ask your buddies about it, ask your friends about it, see if it really makes sense. I don't know a single human being in my life that does not read because it's too feminine. Not a single man, and I know a lot of men. So that I don't know, that it caused me to walk around my work today asking people questions, just because that's the kind of person I am. I don't know. It's late, and that's what I was thinking about today at work. Y'all have a good night.